Why did they stare at her like that? Maybe it was the gray at her temples, the kind that doesn't whisper of wisdom but of age, of something fragile. Or maybe it was the stillness in her step, the way she carried her duffel like it weighed nothing, yet somehow carried her entire past inside it. The bus door hissed open at Fort Dreen, and she stepped down into the desert heat that hit like an open hand. The younger officers shifted, trading looks, quiet, sharp, dismissive. Her name was Alara Vance, and to them she didn't belong. Fort Dreen wasn't a place that welcomed softness or stories that didn't fit a clear mold. It was a machine, built to grind away excuses and shape people into instruments of order. Every wall here seemed to hum with authority, sand-colored concrete and iron discipline. Yet when she walked across the cracked asphalt, her presence broke that rhythm, like a wrong note in a military march. They saw the lines around her eyes, the pale scars along her hands. They saw what they wanted to see: weakness, fatigue, fragility, and they laughed quietly to themselves. 42 years old and joining the specialist intake program, an entry-level track meant for soldiers barely old enough to rent a car. No record, no commendations, just a single paper-thin file. To them, she was a clerical mistake in motion. But she walked like a shadow that refused to explain itself. The desert wind tugged at her hair as she crossed the yard toward the administrative block. The sun hit her square in the face and she didn't flinch. Someone called out, a low whistle, a joke half-whispered, and she didn't react. Every sound slid off her like sand off steel. Her silence had weight. It made the loud ones louder and the foolish ones smaller. Inside the command building, the air was thick with dust and paperwork. Behind a desk cluttered with files and medals sat Colonel Mathis, a man with a stare that had survived 3 wars and lost faith in mercy somewhere along the way. He turned a single sheet of paper between his fingers, frowning as though the ink might rearrange itself if he glared long enough. "Your file's sparse," he said finally. The word hung like a test. Vance stood at parade rest, her boots together, her eyes level. "It is what it is, sir." He studied her, the gray strands, the calm face, the eyes that didn't blink often enough. They were ocean-colored eyes, deep and hard to read. She didn't look nervous, not even slightly. And that bothered him. Everyone who stood before him in this office felt something: fear, pride, desperation. But she felt like a blank page that refused to take ink. "This program isn't a formality," Mathis said. "The standards are absolute. You'll be competing with candidates half your age, most of whom won't make it past the 3rd week. The washout rate is over 80%. She nodded once. "I understand." "I'm giving you an out," he added quietly. "You can walk away now with your dignity intact." "I'm here to meet the standard," she said. Something in her tone made him stop tapping his pen. He wasn't sure if it was confidence or something colder, resolve forged long before he ever learned to give orders. He stamped the paper with a thud that echoed in the room like a verdict. "Report to Sergeant Thorne," he said. "Do not be a problem for him. Do not be a problem for me." When she left, the colonel stared at the door a long time after it closed. The room felt strangely empty, as if she'd taken more than air with her. He glanced down again at the file: name, age, blood type, and one faint, typed line: prior service, incomplete documentation. He frowned. "Incomplete," he murmured. "Convenient." Outside, the desert wind was still waiting. Sergeant Thorne was not a patient man. Built like a wall of muscle and rage, he ruled the training grounds like a tyrant with a stopwatch. His voice was the sound of authority, loud, sharp, impossible to ignore. He didn't teach. He broke people down until what was left could be rebuilt stronger, or not at all. When Alara stood before him, he let the silence stretch just long enough to become cruel. Then he grinned, wide and condescending. "Well, well," he boomed, loud enough for everyone in earshot. "Looks like they're letting Grandma play soldier." Laughter followed, cruel and easy. Vance didn't react. Her eyes remained forward, her posture perfect. The silence after that laughter hung heavy, awkward, like the room itself was holding its breath. "You got something to say, specialist?" Thorne barked, stepping closer. "No, Sergeant." He smirked. "Good. We'll see how quiet you are when you're spitting your lunch on the obstacle course." And that became his mission, to break the calm. Every day, a new attempt. On the rifle range, he'd hover behind her, barking commands. "Control your breathing, Vance. You're wheezing like a pensioner." She would nod, say nothing, and fire. Her rounds landed so close together that the holes overlapped, a single ragged black bloom in the paper target's center. 5 shots, 5 whispers of defiance. The other recruits noticed. A few joked, a few stared, but one, a quiet private first class named Calloway, started watching closer. He noticed how she moved, how she carried her weapon like it wasn't a burden, how her steps never wasted energy. He noticed the small details no one else did. During the 5-mile run, she didn't sprint like the younger men. She started steady, slow, even. By mile 3, the sprinters were gasping. By mile 4, she passed them, not fast but relentless. Her breathing was even. Her eyes were fixed on a horizon only she could see. He realized something then. She wasn't running against them. She was running against time itself. That night, while the barracks echoed with laughter and exhaustion, Calloway caught a glimpse of her sitting on her bunk, quietly cleaning her rifle. She did it differently, slower, more deliberate. Every piece handled with a kind of reverence, like she wasn't maintaining a weapon but tending to an old friend. When the light hit her wrist, he saw something faint, a small tattoo, half hidden beneath her watch. The ink was faded, the design worn by time and sun. It looked like a ghost, its edges blurred into memory. He wanted to ask, but he didn't. She wasn't the kind of person you asked easy questions to. Over the next weeks, the ridicule didn't stop, it changed. The lieutenants, mostly fresh from the academy, treated her as invisible. They spoke around her, as though she were a piece of equipment instead of a person. One in particular, Lieutenant Rassin, seemed to take personal pleasure in testing her patience. "Need help cutting your steak, Vance?" He'd sneer in the mess hall, his friends laughing behind him. "Wouldn't want you to pull a muscle." She'd continue eating in silence. Fork, knife, bite, swallow, no reaction. And that silence, that maddening composure, got under their skin more than any insult could have. It wasn't weakness. It was a wall. Because what none of them knew, what she didn't plan to tell anyone, was that she'd built her silence out of ghosts. There was something buried in her past, something her empty file didn't capture. The gray hair, the steady breath, the perfect control, those weren't marks of age. They were marks of survival, of someone who'd seen what happens when the noise wins. But she wasn't ready to tell that story, not yet. As days became weeks, the tension at Fort Dreen began to shift. The laughter quieted. The mockery grew rare. Something about her presence, that calm, relentless consistency, began to unsettle even the loudest of them. Still, Thorne wasn't satisfied. To him, her strength was an insult. It didn't fit his idea of power, loud, explosive, dominating. Hers was quiet, almost invisible. That kind of strength scared him more than he could admit. And so he decided to test her. The announcement came during combatives training. The gym was hot, the air thick with sweat and bravado. Thorne stood at the center mat, shouting over the hum of exhaustion. "End of week evaluation," he roared. "Reaper drill. 1 soldier in the center, multiple opponents. You fight until you can't." The recruits stiffened. The Reaper was legend, a brutal endurance test, a controlled form of chaos. It broke most who entered. Thorne's eyes found her. His grin was slow, deliberate. "We're running a special scenario today," he said. 5-on-1. The room went quiet. Even the fans seemed to stop spinning. 5-on-1 wasn't a drill, it was punishment. And yet, when her name was called, Alara Vance stepped forward without hesitation. The mat squeaked under her bare feet. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across her face. For a moment, it looked like she was carved from stone. The 5 opponents, Rassin, Cole, Bennett, Davis, Chun, circled her like wolves, confident, grinning. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Her hands hung loose at her sides. Her breathing was steady. Thorne raised his whistle, eyes gleaming. And just before he blew it, she blinked once, slow, deliberate. A movement that seemed to say, "I've been here before." No one knew what that meant. Not yet. But they would. And by the time they understood who she really was, it would already be too late to see her the same way again. The whistle cut through the air like a blade. 5 men moved as one. Rassin charged first, a storm of muscle and ego. He'd been waiting for this moment since the first day she stepped off the bus. This was payback. This was pride. And it was over before it began. Vance didn't meet him head-on. She pivoted, barely shifting her weight. The desert wind seemed to move with her, silent, precise. Her right hand flicked forward, fingers striking just below his ear. Her left foot swept the back of his knee. The impact wasn't loud, but the collapse was. Rassin hit the mat hard, confusion written across his face. His brain was still sending commands to limbs that had stopped listening. For a heartbeat, he didn't understand what had happened. Then his body did and folded. Silence rippled through the room. No one moved. Then 2 more rushed in, Cole from behind, Bennett from the front. The sound of their boots slapped against the mat, echoing in that wide, breathless gym. They came in hard, thinking numbers meant control. She dropped low, turning with their motion, guiding Cole's wrist with both hands. The movement was effortless, graceful, terrifying. She didn't resist his momentum, she used it. Cole's weight became a weapon against Bennett. The 2 collided mid-lunge, a tangled mess of limbs and pain. A single breath later, she stomped down on Cole's knee, just enough to make him scream, not enough to cripple him. Then she stepped back. Perfect balance. Perfect calm. 2 down. 5 seconds. Someone in the crowd whispered, "What the hell?" No one laughed now. Thorne's expression changed. The sneer cracked. His eyes darted from her to the fallen men, as if he couldn't compute the math of what just happened. Rassin was on his knees, gasping. Cole clutched his leg. Bennett groaned through clenched teeth. The 2 still standing, Davis and Chun, exchanged a look. They weren't smirking anymore. Fear had crept in. The kind of fear that stripped away training and left instinct. They began to circle, slower this time, calculated, searching for weakness. Vance stood still, her breathing measured, the rhythm of someone who'd been through worse storms than this. Her chest rose and fell like the tide, steady, patient, eternal. She was giving them time to think. And that was the cruelest mercy of all. Because soldiers trained to react, not to think. Thinking made you hesitate. Hesitation got you hurt. Davis broke first. A faint high jab, then a dive low, a classic takedown attempt. The kind used to overwhelm an opponent with brute weight. She met it with nothing but precision. Her elbow dropped, a small, efficient strike to the base of his neck. It looked like a flick, a reflex. But it short-circuited him completely. He collapsed mid-motion, body limp before his brain could register failure. And just like that, there was one. Chun, pale, shaking. He took a step forward, then back again. The mat squeaked under his feet. His eyes darted to the 4 men lying around him, groaning, clutching ribs, joints, pride. Then up at her. She hadn't moved. Not a drop of sweat, not a flicker of emotion. Her eyes were steady, not angry, not triumphant, just watching. Waiting. Predatory impatience. He raised his hands, palms out, the gesture universal across all languages of fear. "I yield," he whispered. And just like that, the fight ended. But the silence that followed felt heavier than any punch. The gym seemed to hold its breath. Colonel Mathis stood above, his knuckles white on the railing. He'd come to see a failure, a curiosity crushed under pressure. What he saw instead didn't belong in any manual he'd ever read. He saw grace shaped into violence, efficiency honed into art, stillness turned into dominance. It wasn't fighting. It was something older, something closer to truth. Then his gaze caught a glint on her wrist, that faint, faded tattoo. A ghost. And the memory came back. A story he wasn't supposed to remember. Years ago, in a dusty outpost no map dared to mark, he'd shared a bottle of whiskey with a man from the agency. A man who'd whispered about a unit that didn't exist. A group so buried under clearance levels that even the shadows denied them. The Spectres. Operatives trained for the unspeakable. Sent where wars had no flags and victories had no witnesses. And the best of them, the one even ghosts feared, had a call sign. Spectre 1. Mathis's mouth went dry. He looked down at her, the calm, quiet woman who just dismantled 5 trained officers without so much as a raised voice. He whispered the name like a confession. Spectre 1. On the floor, Thorne's face had lost all color. He looked like a man realizing he'd spent weeks trying to teach fire how to burn. All his bluster, all his pride gone. He stared at her, the truth dawning slow and brutal. He hadn't been molding a recruit. He'd been standing in the presence of mastery. The kind that didn't need rank or medals to be obeyed. The kind that simply was. A sound broke the silence, sharp, echoing. Clapping. One soldier at the back, Calloway, standing at attention, hands coming together. Not applause for victory. Applause for revelation. Others joined in, hesitant at first, then more. The sound grew, spreading through the gym like a wave. It wasn't celebration, it was apology. Every soldier who had mocked her now stood, clapping, heads slightly bowed. They weren't honoring power. They were honoring restraint. She didn't smile, didn't look around. She simply nodded once, a gesture so small it almost went unseen. Then she turned, walking off the mat, calm as she had entered. Thorne stepped aside. He didn't stop her, couldn't. The applause followed her until the gym doors closed behind her, heavy steel slamming like punctuation at the end of a legend. No one had realized they were living in. Mathis came down from the observation deck. His boots struck the floor in slow, echoing thuds. When he caught up to her in the hallway, she was already reaching for the exit. "Vance," he said. She stopped but didn't turn. He struggled for words. He had medals, commands, victories to his name, yet none of them had prepared him for this. "Your file," he managed. It doesn't do you justice." When she turned, there was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Not pride, not satisfaction. Weariness. A kind that no rest cures. "It's just a file, sir," she said softly. "It did its job." He frowned. Its job. Her lips curved, not a smile, but something like forgiveness. "To make me invisible." Then she pushed open the door. The desert light flooded in harsh, beautiful final. She stepped through it without hesitation. Mathis watched the door swing shut, the sound echoing like an ending. And for a long time after, no one spoke. Inside the gym, Sergeant Thorne stood among the scattered helmets and echoes of broken pride. He walked to the center mat, where the dust was still settling, and crouched. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up one of the fallen helmets. It was cracked. He stared at the mark, then at the space where she had stood, the stillness, the precision, the control. The silence she left behind was louder than his voice had ever been. Around him the recruits were still standing, faces flushed, hearts pounding. Something inside them had shifted, not just respect but understanding. They'd come here to be shaped into weapons. But they had just seen what happens when a weapon learns to think. Calloway's eyes lingered on the door she'd walked through. He didn't know her story. but he knew enough. That some legends don't need medals. They just need a moment to be seen. Outside, under the wide desert sky, Vance paused by the training field. The air smelled of sand and oil, the kind of air that carried memory. She took a slow breath. The applause was still echoing faintly behind her. For the first time in years, she felt it, the thin line between who she'd been and who she pretended to be. She'd spent decades in the silence of missions that never existed, wars that never had names. She'd buried friends whose deaths couldn't be recorded. She'd become a ghost so thoroughly that even she had started to forget the sound of her own humanity. And now, a room full of strangers had seen her. Not as a myth, not as a weapon, but as something simple, human. The thought made her chest tighten. She took another breath, slower this time. Somewhere in the distance, the wind howled across the range, low, mournful, familiar. It sounded like an old friend whispering through time. Maybe the world hadn't forgotten her completely. Maybe it had just been waiting for her to walk back into the light. Inside, Mathis returned to his office. The single file sat on his desk, edges curled from use. He stared at it for a long moment, then reached for his pen. He wrote one line at the bottom, in neat, deliberate handwriting. Recommendation, assignment pending, evaluation beyond standard parameters. He paused, then added beneath it. Note, sometimes, the ghosts we bury come back to remind us what courage looks like. He set the pen down and leaned back in his chair, staring at the wall. For the first time in years, he smiled, faintly, like a man who had just remembered something he used to believe in. Outside, Alara kept walking, the desert sun turning the horizon into gold. Her shadow stretched long behind her, thin and weightless. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Some truths, once revealed, don't require witnesses. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. She thought leaving the base would bring silence. It didn't. The desert stretched for miles, wide and endless, but the quiet out there had a weight of its own. It pressed against her skin, heavy and expectant, like the world was holding its breath again, waiting to see what she'd do next. Her boots left faint prints in the sand that the wind erased within minutes. A perfect metaphor, she thought. That's all I ever was, a footprint in shifting ground. By the time the base disappeared behind her, the applause had turned to a memory, one that felt unreal, fragile, like it belonged to someone else. She reached her truck, an old military-grade Humvee that had seen better decades, and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cracked, the radio half-dead, the smell of oil and dust baked into every surface. She liked it that way. Machines with history were easier to trust than people. When the ignition caught, the low hum filled the cabin, grounding her. She drove east toward nowhere. It was supposed to be over. Her assignment at Fort Dreen had been a test, not for her but for them. Someone high up wanted to see if the ghost could still breathe, and she had, too well. She knew what came next. They always came back when the world started to fall apart. By dusk, the desert horizon was bleeding orange and gold, and her phone vibrated once on the passenger seat, a number with no ID. She stared at it. It rang twice, then stopped. A coded call, one she hadn't received in over 12 years. 2 rings meant watch for the signal. She closed her eyes. Not again, she whispered. But ghosts don't get to rest. That night she parked by a derelict airfield, the kind abandoned after wars no one wanted to remember. The hangars were hollow, their roofs torn open by storms. Wind howled through them like voices trapped too long in steel. She walked to the edge of the runway. Moonlight glinted on a single piece of metal buried in the dirt, a dog tag, half buried, half rusted. She bent down, brushed the sand away. No name, just a number. She flipped it over. The back read only, Spectre Protocol 11. Her chest tightened. She remembered. It had been a night like this, cold, dry, silent, when Command told her the mission wasn't coming back, when her team vanished into a valley that didn't exist and her orders were rewritten to forget. But memory is a traitor. It doesn't obey, it survives. She pocketed the tag, walked back to the Humvee and waited. An hour later, headlights appeared in the distance, slow, deliberate, the rhythm of someone who didn't want to surprise her. A black SUV rolled to a stop 20 meters away. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out tall, dressed in civilian black, his hair more gray than brown. He didn't carry a weapon, didn't need to, his presence was enough. "Spectre 1, he said quietly. She didn't answer. "Alara then." His voice softened, like the name itself was something forbidden. She looked at him long, slow. "You're late." He smiled faintly. "You didn't think they'd let you disappear forever, did you?" She turned away, walking toward the dark horizon. "I thought I'd earned that." "You did," he said, "and then you broke 5 officers at Fort Dreen." Word travels fast. He stepped closer, the desert wind tugging at his coat. "You didn't just humiliate a training unit, Alara. You exposed them. You reminded everyone what a real operative looks like. And now Command wants you back." She said nothing. "Unofficially, of course," he added. "They can't exactly put your name on a roster that doesn't exist." She stared at the sand. "There is no Command anymore, not for me." He hesitated. "There's something happening, something off the books even for us." Her jaw tightened. "There's always something happening." "Not like this," he said. "A team went dark in northern Korad. 6 operators, no comms, no recovery. Locals report something different, like they were hunted." She turned then, eyes cold and steady. "You want me to clean up their mess?" "I want you to find out what happened," he said. "That's all." "And if I refuse?" He gave a faint smile. "Then you'll keep driving into the dark until the ghosts catch up anyway." For a moment, the desert between them was nothing but wind and memory. Then she exhaled, a slow, quiet surrender. "When?" "Transport leaves in 6 hours, briefing en route." She nodded once. "You already know I'll go." "I did," he said. "I just needed to hear it." He handed her a file, thin, classified, unmarked. She took it without looking. As the SUV's lights faded into the horizon, she sat in her Humvee, staring at the manila folder in her lap. She didn't open it yet. She didn't need to. She already knew this wasn't a rescue. It was a reckoning. The transport jet cut through the dawn sky like a silent blade. Inside, the hum of engines filled the cabin with a low, constant pulse. Alara sat alone near the back, helmet resting on her knee, eyes half closed. Across from her, 2 men in tactical gear whispered to each other, stealing glances when they thought she wasn't looking. They didn't recognize her, not yet. She preferred it that way. The briefing officer, a young captain who looked barely 30, approached her mid-flight. Nervous, formal, too polished. "Special Operative Vance, ma'am. I've been asked to provide mission parameters." She didn't look up. "Read them." He hesitated. "Ma'am, I was told you." "Read them," she repeated. He cleared his throat. 6-man recon unit. Call sign Hound. Deployed 12 days ago to Korad Province, Northern Sector. Primary objective: confirm insurgent activity in the Red Valley Corridor. Secondary objective: extract high-value defector. And comms lost after first contact. Drone recon failed. Satellite feed corrupted. Locals report lights, gunfire, then nothing. Her eyes opened. Corrupted how? He frowned. Static interference. The analyst said it looked like signal suppression, but not jamming, more like the feed was erased. Erased by who? We don't know. She leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You're not sending me to investigate insurgents, Captain. You're sending me to find out why your data's bleeding." The captain looked away. "Ma'am, I just read what I'm given." "That's the problem," she said quietly. He didn't respond. When he walked away, she turned her gaze to the small porthole window. Below, the landscape unfolded, endless sand, fractured rock, and the black veins of old riverbeds that no longer carried water. The kind of land that forgets. She felt a hollow ache in her chest, memory again. A mission years ago, a valley not unlike this one, 6 operators, only one came back, her. Spectre 1. And she'd buried the rest under orders she never signed. Her fingers brushed the inside of her wrist, the faded tattoo hidden by her watch strap. She traced it once, a ghostly habit she could never break. The engines droned on, the sun rose higher. Somewhere buried deep beneath the desert, something waited. By the time the jet touched down, the air was thick with heat. The landing strip was crude, just packed sand and the skeleton of an old hangar. Waiting nearby were 2 armored trucks, one of which bore the insignia of a private contractor, discreet, deniable. A man climbed down from the passenger side. He wasn't in uniform. Civilian clothes, but the stance gave him away, ex-military, high rank, old habits he couldn't hide. He extended a hand. "Director Havern," he said, "you must be Vance." She looked at the hand, then at him, didn't shake it. "Spectre doesn't exist anymore." He smiled faintly. "Neither does this operation, so we're even." He motioned toward the truck. "Let's talk on the move." The convoy rolled out into the desert, engines rumbling low. The sun painted everything gold and white, blinding at times. Havern leaned back, studying her. "You made quite the impression at Fort Dreen." "I didn't mean to." "That's what makes it impressive," he smirked. "You humiliated a man who trains the best in the country. You think people wouldn't notice." "I don't think about people," she said. "You should start." She didn't answer. Havern's smile faded. The missing team Hound was running an unsanctioned recon sweep. Off the record. Someone in intelligence went around command, funded through private channels. That's why it's messy. Which means whoever set it up doesn't want them found. Exactly. Then why send me? He looked out the window. Because I don't work for them. She studied him. You're not here for a rescue either. No, he said quietly. I'm here for the truth, same as you. They rode in silence after that. The road, if it could be called that, turned into dry rock and fractured clay. The landscape looked more like a scar than a country. In the distance, jagged peaks cut against the sky. The driver pointed. Red Valley 15 clicks out. Vance watched the horizon. The air shimmered with heat. Shadows rippled across the sand like something alive beneath it. She leaned forward slightly. Stop the trucks. Havern frowned. We're not at coordinates yet. I said stop. The convoy halted. She stepped out, boots crunching against stone, eyes scanning the ridgeline. The air felt wrong, too still, too quiet. A long pause. Then she said softly, they're watching. Havern stiffened. Who? Her hand rested lightly on her sidearm. That's what we're about to find out. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint metallic scent. Burnt oil, blood. The same smell she remembered from the night her unit disappeared. She took a slow breath. The desert always told the truth if you knew how to listen. And right now, it was whispering that the past she'd buried wasn't finished with her yet. Not by a long shot. The road to Red Valley wasn't really a road at all. It was a memory carved into rock, narrow, fractured, and cruel. The trucks crawled forward, engines growling, the tires grinding dust into the wind. The horizon shimmered like glass, but beneath that mirage was something darker. The kind of quiet that didn't come from peace. The kind that came from aftermath. Vance sat in the back of the lead truck, eyes scanning the ridgeline through the open hatch. Her rifle rested across her knees, untouched but ready, the weight of old habits, muscle memory made human. The silence felt alive. like it was watching. She glanced toward Havern. The director was pretending not to be nervous, flipping through data on a tablet that kept losing signal. Every time the connection cut, he'd curse softly under his breath. "Signal's unstable," he muttered. "Satellite links compromised past the ridge." "Of course it is," Vance said. He looked at her. "You expected that." She nodded. "They're jamming the perimeter. We've seen no signs of—" "It's not a signal block," she interrupted quietly. "It's a dead zone. Natural or not, something here kills electronics." He frowned, glancing at the tablet again. "That's not possible, even the—" "Everything's possible," she said. Her voice wasn't dramatic, just certain. And that certainty carried weight. The driver slowed as they entered a narrow pass. The cliffs rose on both sides, tall, jagged, and painted with centuries of wind erosion. The sunlight barely reached the valley floor. The temperature dropped suddenly, the air thick with static and sand. "This place gives me the creeps," the driver whispered. Vance didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the rocks above them. Every shadow looked deliberate. Every silence felt too quiet. Then she saw it. A flash of metal, small, precise, high on the ridge. She didn't think. She moved. "Brake," she barked. The driver froze. "What?" "Now." He slammed the pedal. The truck screeched to a halt. A half-second later, a blast of gunfire tore through the air. Bullets shredded the windshield of the second vehicle, glass exploding into the sunlight. "Contact upper ridge." The team scrambled out, ducking behind the wheels. Havern shouted for cover, his voice lost in the chaos. Dust and sound collided. But Vance wasn't ducking. She moved forward, calm, fluid, her rifle raised, eyes scanning the cliffs. 3 muzzle flashes, different angles, coordinated fire. 3 shooters, she said under her breath. 1 high, 2 flanking. She fired once. A short, sharp burst, not at the flashes but at the echo between them. A figure tumbled from the ridge, hard, fast, silent. Her team stared. How the hell did she? "Pattern of sound," she said quietly. "They're not professionals." Havern reloaded behind the tire, his hands shaking. "Then who are they?" Vance watched the second ridge. "Not locals." She sighted again, exhaled slowly, and fired. Another flash went dark. The valley fell silent again. Too silent. The driver cursed under his breath. "We clear." "No," she said. "We're being tested." She stepped out from cover. The wind whipped her hair into her eyes, but she didn't blink. She walked forward, slow, deliberate, like she was stepping back into a nightmare that had been waiting for her to come home. Her boots crunched over the dirt, the echo sharp in the emptiness. The third shooter was gone before she reached the ridge. Just a rifle left behind, no tracks, no sign of retreat. Havern climbed up after her, breathing hard. "You think this ties to Hound Team?" She knelt beside the rifle, running her fingers over the trigger. The metal was clean, too clean. "This weapon was wiped," she murmured. "Whoever was here doesn't want to be found." Havern looked around. Then what were they shooting for? Warning, distraction. She looked at him, eyes cold. "A scan." He frowned. "A what?" "They wanted to see how I'd react." He froze. "They knew you were coming." She stood. "They always do." The wind howled through the valley, low, haunting, like a voice trying to speak through sand. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting it brush against her face. For an instant, she could almost hear it, not the wind, but memory. Laughter. Voices. Her team. 12 years ago, almost to the day. Spectre Unit 7. She could still see their faces if she let herself. She didn't. She opened her eyes again, burying the ghosts where they belonged. "Havern," she said quietly, "where's your data on the last known coordinates of Hound Team?" He pulled out his tablet, tapping at the static-filled screen. 5 clicks south, near a cluster of old mining tunnels. Her jaw tightened. Of course it's tunnels. You've been there. No, she said, but I've been everywhere that smells like that. She started walking back toward the trucks. We move now. Without recon. Recon's useless here, she said. Everything you send ahead disappears. Havern hesitated, then he followed. The trucks bounced across the uneven ground, kicking up clouds of fine red dust. The sky above them was fading, gold bleeding into violet, then into gray. By the time they reached the coordinates, night had arrived. The valley floor opened into a wide crater filled with broken metal, rusted tracks, collapsed scaffolding, and the black mouths of mining tunnels carved deep into the earth. The air smelled like old fuel and burnt wires. The driver killed the engine. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Havern whispered, "Where are they?" Vance stepped out of the truck, her flashlight beam cutting through the dark. It illuminated pieces of gear, shredded packs, cracked helmets, half buried by sand. One still had blood on it. She knelt, brushing the dust off the insignia. "Hound," she said softly. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled for the briefest second. Havern crouched beside her. "There were 6 men, you think." "They didn't run," she interrupted. "Whatever hit them, it was fast, silent." He shone his light toward the nearest tunnel. The beam barely penetrated the black. "Inside." "Probably." He hesitated. "You don't seem surprised." She looked at the tunnel. "I've seen this before." "When?" Her gaze stayed fixed on the darkness ahead. "The last mission Spectre ever ran." Havern's breath caught. "You mean?" She started walking toward the entrance. "Whatever this is, it's not new. It's the same storm, just wearing a different face." They entered the tunnel, lights flickering across rusted beams and collapsed machinery. The air grew colder, thinner. Each step echoed, swallowed by the dark. Deeper inside, the walls were marked scratches, symbols, a language half remembered, half erased. Havern ran his fingers over one. "What is this?" "Not writing," she said. "Tagging, someone marking safe paths or trying to." They moved another 50 meters in, before they found the first body. It was half buried under debris, uniform torn, gear scattered. The skin had gone pale gray, not from death but from something else. A strange film clung to it, faintly metallic. Havern covered his mouth. "What the hell?" Vance crouched, shining her light on the man's hands. The fingertips were blackened, burnt. But there were no scorch marks anywhere else. "Signal residue," she whispered. Havern blinked. "Signal." She nodded slowly. "Like his nervous system short-circuited. I've seen this. Once, in Morocco." "What caused it?" She looked up at him. "We never found out, but the team that went in after us didn't come back." He stared at her. "And they sent you." Her lips twitched. "Guess old habits die harder than soldiers." They continued deeper. The tunnels twisted into smaller chambers, the air heavier with each step. Their flashlights flickered more often now, batteries struggling against something unseen. Then they heard it. A sound. Faint, metallic. Not an echo, movement. Havern froze. "You hear that?" Vance raised a hand for silence. Her flashlight beam swept across the tunnel. Nothing, just dust. But the sound came again, closer this time. "Tab, tab, tab." She raised her weapon. "Backlight off," she whispered. They shut their lights. The darkness swallowed them whole. Her breathing slowed, heartbeat steady. Then movement. Something brushed the air near her cheek. Cold, too fast, too close. She fired once. The muzzle flash lit the tunnel for a heartbeat, revealing nothing but empty air and falling dust. Havern's voice was a whisper. "What was that?" She didn't answer. She already knew the question he was too afraid to ask. "It was what?" "It was who?" They reached a chamber deep underground, wide, circular, carved into the earth long before the mine was ever built. In the center stood a single structure, an old comms relay, still humming faintly with residual energy. On it, scratched into the metal, were 6 numbers, the same ones printed on the dog tag she'd found at the airfield. Her stomach turned cold. She walked up slowly, brushing away dust. The machine sparked once, faint blue light flickering. Then she saw it, written beneath the numbers in blood. "Spectre 1, forgive us." She went still. Havern whispered, "What does that mean?" She didn't speak, couldn't. The wind outside howled through the tunnels, and for a moment she swore she heard her old team again. Laughter in the dark. The kind of sound memory makes when it refuses to die. The chamber felt wrong. Too still, too symmetrical, like the earth itself had been carved by intent, not by time. Havern's flashlight trembled slightly as the beam swept across the curved walls. Every surface gleamed faintly, as if coated in glass dust. The air buzzed with low, static energy that crawled against their skin. Vance didn't move for a long time. She just stared at the blood-written words on the relay. "Spectre 1, forgive us." Her breath came slow, shallow. She'd seen her name tied to death before, mission logs, debriefs, redacted reports, but never like this. Never in someone's last act. Havern knelt beside her, his voice low. "They knew you." "They shouldn't have." "Then why?" She cut him off, eyes narrowing. "Because someone wanted me to find this." The relay flickered again, humming faintly, almost like it was alive. She reached toward it. The surface was cold, colder than stone had any right to be underground. When her fingertips brushed the metal, a burst of static cracked through the chamber. The lights died. Darkness swallowed everything. For half a second the hum grew louder, rising like a whisper turning into a scream, then faded just as quickly. The air smelled like ozone and burnt copper. Havern cursed softly, "Power surge." Vance's voice was steady. "No, it tried to talk to us." He frowned. "What?" "Signal feedback," she said. "Encrypted." "Encrypted with what?" "Something old." She stepped back, the faint glow from her wristwatch the only light between them. "We need to pull what data's left." Havern hesitated. "Without power." "We won't need it, it's residual, magnetic imprint." She slung her pack off her shoulder and pulled out a compact data probe, small, military issue, long discontinued. She pressed it to the relay's base. The screen sputtered to life with static, then froze on a single fragment of corrupted video. 2 figures in tactical gear, voices distant, distorted. "Copy that, we found." Static. Then a face, half-lit by red emergency glow. A man's eyes wide, desperate. "Spectre, we shouldn't have come, it's—" The feed died. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Havern swallowed hard. That was one of Hound's operators. She shook her head. "No, that was mine." He stared at her. "Your team been dead for 12 years." "I know," she whispered. For a moment she felt her pulse in her fingertips, hot and rhythmic, like the earth was breathing through her. The past and present tangled in her chest. Then the tunnel behind them groaned, metal bending, echoing. A long, low sound that didn't belong to wind or machinery. "Movement," she said. Havern swung his light toward the noise. Shadows rippled across the walls, thin and jerky. He stepped back. "What is that?" "Not what," she said softly. "Whoever did this wants us to keep moving." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You think this is some kind of trap?" "It's always a trap," she said. They pressed deeper. The passage split into 2. She led left down a narrow shaft lined with old cables. Her light flickered again, briefly revealing handprints on the wall, hundreds of them, smeared in dust and oil. Some small, some not human-shaped at all. Havern slowed. "Tell me those are from miners." "Miners don't leave prints that high," she said quietly. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Their breath misted in front of them now, faint ghosts hanging in the air. Halfway down, the tunnel widened into another cavern. And there, half buried in rock, was a piece of twisted wreckage, black metal, curved edges, no markings. Vance crouched, brushing it off. It wasn't aircraft metal. It was thicker, smoother, seamless. She ran her glove across the surface. No welds, no bolts, just one continuous shape. Havern crouched beside her. "What is it?" "I don't know," she said, "but I've seen fragments like this before, in files that didn't officially exist." He looked uneasy. "You're telling me this isn't insurgent?" "I'm telling you we're standing in the middle of something someone tried very hard to erase." He studied her profile in the dim light, calm, unreadable, but not indifferent. Beneath that control was fatigue that went beyond sleep. "How many times have you done this?" he asked quietly. She glanced at him. "Too many." "And you keep coming back." She gave a small, tired smile. "You don't come back from this kind of work. You just stop pretending you left." A sound cracked the silence, faint, metallic behind them. Footsteps. Havern spun, weapon raised. "We're not alone." Vance didn't move. "Don't shoot, let it come." The echo drew closer, slow, dragging, uneven. The beam of Havern's light caught the outline of a figure emerging from the dark. A man in tactical gear, helmet cracked, face pale and dry as parchment. His eyes were open but empty. His movements mechanical, jerky, like muscle memory without a soul behind it. Havern's breath hitched. "Dear God." Vance stepped forward slowly. "He's not alive." The man collapsed to his knees, head lolling forward, whispering something under his breath. She crouched, leaning close. "Inspector, forgive us." Her stomach twisted. Same words, same voice pattern as the recording. Then his body went still, eyes glassy. Havern backed up, voice trembling. "What is that? Some kind of conditioning?" She stood. "No, it's a message." She looked around the tunnel. "They were trying to warn me." He stared. "You think your old team left this?" "I think someone used them," she said quietly. "Turned them into signals." The realization hung in the air like smoke. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Havern said softly, "How do you stay calm through this?" She didn't look at him. "You don't stay calm, you just learn not to show it." She turned back toward the main corridor. "We keep moving." They found a rusted access ladder leading down into a lower level, deeper than any map showed. The metal groaned under their weight, the air thick with the scent of oil and earth. At the bottom lay a maintenance tunnel, half collapsed. Their lights flickered across cables that looked newer than the mine itself. Someone had been here recently. Havern checked his weapon. "You really think the people who did this are still down here?" "No," she said, "but whatever they were using still is." They followed the tunnel until it opened into a wide chamber filled with stacked crates. Most were marked only with serial numbers, some with faded military stamps. She pried one open. Inside were files sealed in plastic, untouched by dust. She pulled one out, peeled back the cover. Her breath caught. Across the top, Spectre Reclamation Project. Below it, photographs, her own team, younger, alive, standing in front of an aircraft that didn't exist. Havern leaned over her shoulder, reading. "You were their prototype." She nodded slowly. They were building something they couldn't control. "What happened?" She closed the folder. "We found out." The hum of machinery deepened somewhere behind them, a low vibration rolling through the floor. The lights flickered again, this time not from power failure, but from interference. Havern looked around. "Tell me that's you." "It's not," she said. A faint glow appeared at the far end of the chamber, bluish, pulsing. She raised her rifle, advancing slowly. The light came from another relay, smaller, still active. On the screen was a single line of text looping endlessly. "Initiating protocol. Spectre 1 retrieval. Havern's face went pale. Retrieval. She whispered, "They're calling me back." The floor trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere deep below, machinery roared to life, engines that hadn't breathed in years. Havern grabbed her arm. "We have to go." "Wait," she said. Her eyes were locked on the screen. The letters flickered, rearranging themselves for a brief instant. "Welcome home." Then the power cut. Darkness again. Only their breathing, ragged and fast. Havern's voice was tight. "What does that mean?" She holstered her rifle slowly. "It means they never stopped watching." He looked at her, fear and realization colliding. "You think this whole valley was built for you?" She shook her head. "Not for me, because of me." The air grew heavier, vibrating with subsonic pulses. She could feel it in her teeth, in her bones. "Havern," she said quietly, "we're leaving now." They retraced their steps, running through the tunnels as lights flickered behind them, one by one coming to life in sequence, like the path itself was awakening. The hum chased them upward, growing louder, angrier. By the time they reached the surface, the night sky was trembling. The wind had turned electric, streaks of static dancing across the sand like blue fireflies. The trucks were still there, engines cold, but the radios dead, batteries drained. Havern leaned against the hood, panting. "What the hell did we just wake up?" Vance stared back toward the mouth of the tunnel. "Not what, who?" He looked at her, confused. She turned to him slowly. "You wanted the truth. Here it is. Spectre Unit 7 didn't die in action. They were repurposed. Someone rewired their neural signatures into data ghosts. That's what you've been losing on your satellites, not static. Them." He went pale. "You're saying your team became—" "Signals," she said. "Weapons you can't see, only feel." The desert wind howled louder, carrying the faint echo of voices, distorted, layered, like 6 people speaking at once through broken radios. Havern backed away. "Please tell me that's the wind." Vance didn't answer, because deep down she already knew. The ghosts she'd buried weren't gone. They'd been waiting. And now she'd finally given them a reason to come back. The wind didn't sound like wind anymore. It howled, yes, but beneath it ran something that didn't belong to weather: cadence, rhythm, fragments of language shaped by interference. Voices buried inside static. Havern froze beside the truck, head tilted as if the air itself were speaking. Vance loaded a fresh magazine, the motion calm, practiced, ritual. "Get inside," she said. He didn't move. Listen, it's saying something." She already heard it. Her own name stretched through distortion. "Spectre 1, come home." Inside. This time he obeyed. She climbed into the passenger seat, eyes on the horizon. Lightning rippled across the sky, thin blue veins, silent, unnatural. Each flash made the desert shimmer like water. Havern gripped the wheel. "If this is signal bleed from your team, if they're somehow still." "They're not alive," she cut in softly. "They're echoes. Whatever they became, it isn't human anymore." He stared at her. "You say that like you've seen it before." She didn't look at him. "I have." The truck roared to life. They drove north, sand hammering the windshield, the air electric. Every few miles the radio burst alive with brief, jagged fragments, laughter, screams, gunfire. None continuous, each like a memory trying to reassemble itself. Havern's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. Why would someone do this? Turn soldiers into whatever this is? "Because data doesn't bleed," she said. "You can deploy it anywhere, erase it anytime. Perfect soldiers, perfect ghosts." He glanced at her. "And you?" "I was the prototype that refused." They drove through the night, following coordinates she'd memorized from the classified file, an extraction point that no longer existed on modern maps. She didn't trust it, but it was the only path out of the valley's interference field. At dawn, the storm broke. They rolled to a stop on the rim of a dried lake bed, the world around them scoured clean by wind. The air was too still again. No birds, no insects, only the faint hum of the Earth's pulse. Havern killed the engine. We should wait for satellite lock. Won't work, she murmured. Nothing transmits here without permission. He frowned. Permission from who? She opened the door and stepped out into the silence. That's what we're about to find out. The lake bed was wide and cracked, its surface a mosaic of white salt and red dust. In the center, half buried beneath the crust, stood a single black monolith, sleek, angular, untouched by erosion. Havern followed, shielding his eyes. Was this here before? No, she said. It wasn't natural when I saw it the first time either. He stopped walking. You saw this exact thing. She nodded. In Morocco, the same frequency signature, same hum. She placed her hand on the surface. The texture wasn't stone. It vibrated faintly, warm, alive. Symbols shifted beneath the skin of the material like phosphorescent veins. Havern whispered, "What is it?" "Memory storage," she said. "The hardware for whatever's in the valley." Then the surface rippled. Light flowed outward from where her fingers touched, crawling up the structure like liquid fire. Havern stumbled back. "You triggered something." "No," she said quietly. "It recognized me." The light flared, projecting an image into the air, grainy, ghostly. 6 figures standing shoulder to shoulder, helmets off, faces young, alive. Her team. The recording wavered. One of them, Keller, her second in command, stepped forward, looking straight at the lens. "Spectre 1," he said. "If you're seeing this, then we didn't make it out. They told us this mission was containment. It was replication. They're using us, our neural maps, to build the next iteration. You don't let them finish it." The image flickered, cutting to static, then reforming again, closer now, Keller's voice rough. "Remember what you told me, that ghosts are just memories that refuse to die. Well, maybe that's what we are now, but we'll make sure they remember what they did to us." The projection died. The light sank back into the black stone, leaving only silence and morning haze. Havern exhaled shakily. "They recorded that for you." "No," she said. "They recorded it into me." He blinked, meaning. "My neural signature was their failsafe, a trigger. When I touched the interface, it pulled the data from me like a key." He stared. "So the moment you left Fort Dreen, this was all already set in motion?" "Yes." She looked out across the lake bed, the rising sun slicing the horizon in two. "Someone wanted me to see what I'd buried, to make me finish what they couldn't." Havern stepped closer. "Then we finish it." She turned to him, the faintest trace of sadness behind her eyes. "You don't understand. Finishing it means destroying it, everything, including them." He hesitated. "They're already dead." She shook her head. "Not to me." They spent the next hour wiring charges around the monolith. Havern handled the detonators while she calibrated frequency disruptors from the truck, small devices that pulsed low-spectrum EMP waves. As she worked, he watched her. There was something in the way she moved, precise, quiet, reverent, like she wasn't just planting explosives, she was burying friends. "Alara," he said finally, "what happened that night, the one you never told command?" She paused, still crouched by the device. For a long time she didn't answer. Then, softly, "We were sent to extract a defecting scientist from an abandoned signal array in southern Mali. They said he had intel on a rogue weapons program. When we got there, we found the array still active. It was broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist, self-replicating code carried through sound. We tried to shut it down. Keller stayed behind to buy us time. The signal, it didn't stop. It consumed him. Then the others. I was the only one who made it out before they sealed the site." She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Command called it a containment failure. They lied. They rebuilt the system here. Havern's face went pale, and the signal. Still alive, still hungry. The last charge clicked into place. She stood, dusting off her hands. When we detonate, everything tied to it dies with it, including whatever fragments of them remain. He nodded slowly, then let's do it. But before she could arm the sequence, a deep tremor rolled through the ground, slow at first, then violent. The monolith pulsed again, brighter this time, its surface splitting like skin under strain. Havern stumbled back. It's reacting. She raised her weapon. No, it's responding. From the cracks came light, not steady but pulsing with heartbeat rhythm, and within that rhythm sound layered voices, 6 of them. Alara, don't. We're still here. Her breath hitched. Keller. The voices grew clearer, surrounding them. Havern shouted over the noise. They're communicating. They're pleading, she said. The light flared upward, forming shapes, silhouettes that flickered between matter and energy, faces half-formed, fading in and out. Keller again reaching toward her. You left us. She took a step forward, voice trembling. I tried to save you. You shut us down. You were gone. The light surged. Havern shouted, Vance, get back. She didn't move, her eyes filled with something she hadn't allowed herself in years' grief. I'm sorry. The ghost faces wavered, their edges breaking apart. The voices layered again, accusation, pain, forgiveness. Then one word cut through it all. Finish. She hesitated. What? Finish what we started. The light around the monolith dimmed, stabilizing for a moment. She understood then. They weren't begging her to stop. They were giving her permission. She turned to Havern, set the timer. He hesitated. Are you sure? They want this. He armed the detonator. The timer blinked red. 3 minutes. They sprinted back toward the trucks, the ground trembling harder with each second. The hum behind them deepened into a roar. When they reached the ridge, Havern turned to look back. The monolith was splitting apart, shafts of blue light tearing through the cracks like lightning frozen in glass. He whispered, God forgive us. She pressed the trigger. The explosion tore through the lakebed, a column of dust and light rising into the sky. The shockwave hit them seconds later, knocking both to the ground. For a moment there was no sound, no time, no world, only brightness. Then silence. When she opened her eyes, the sun had climbed higher. The monolith was gone. Only a crater remained, the air above it shimmering with heat. Havern coughed, pushing himself up. Is it over? She stared at the crater. Listen. He did. Nothing, no hum, no whispers, just wind. She nodded once. It's over. But as she turned away, she caught a glint on the ground near her boot, half buried in dust. A dog tag, Keller. She picked it up, thumb tracing the engraved numbers. For a moment her vision blurred. Havern approached quietly. You did what you had to. No, she said. I did what I couldn't before. She slipped the tag into her pocket, the metal warm against her skin. They climbed into the truck. The engine sputtered, then caught. Static crackled briefly through the radio, one final burst of sound. A voice faint, distorted. Thank you. Then nothing. Vance exhaled slowly, a tremor of relief and sorrow tangled together. She looked out at the horizon, the valley now still, almost peaceful. Havern shifted into gear. Where to? She watched the sunlight burn away the last trace of blue in the sky. Anywhere the ghosts can't find me. He nodded, starting the engine. As they drove away, she rested her hand on the pocket that held the tag. The weight was small, but it felt like gravity itself, reminding her that redemption isn't found in forgiveness. It's found in the choice to face what others bury. The desert wind followed them for miles, whispering through the open windows. This time it didn't sound like voices. It sounded like peace. And sometimes peace isn't silence. It's the moment the noise finally decides to let you go. The desert was different in daylight. It looked clean, emptied, innocent, as if nothing had ever lived beneath it. Havern drove in silence. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the heat rippling above the asphalt like ghosts climbing for air. Every few miles he glanced at her. Vance sat rigid, eyes fixed forward, hands still, breathing measured. Only the small movement of her thumb against the pocket that held Keller's tag betrayed the storm inside. They hadn't spoken since the blast. HQ's going to want answers, Havern said finally. She didn't look at him. They'll want deniability first. You're not wrong. He hesitated, then added, You saved us, Alara. She turned her head slowly. I erased them. He didn't argue, he couldn't. The crater behind them was proof that salvation sometimes looks exactly like loss. Hours later, the first comm signal bled back into their radios, fragments of military channels, coordinates, white noise. Havern adjusted the dial. We're out of the dead zone. Vance exhaled softly as if surfacing from deep water. Good, that means they'll come. For us. For me. They reached the outskirts of a forward operations base by nightfall, a cluster of prefab hangars glowing under harsh floodlights. Before the truck even stopped, armed soldiers surrounded them. Havern raised his hands. Easy, we're friendly. The ranking officer approached, scanning their badges. Director Havern, Specialist Vance. He frowned. You were declared missing 72 hours ago. Havern gave a thin smile. We got lost. The officer's gaze slid to Vance. Command's been asking for you. She didn't react. Of course they had. They were escorted into a debriefing tent that smelled of diesel and dust. Inside, a row of officers waited behind a folding table. At the center sat Colonel Mathis. He looked older, wearier, but his eyes were the same, sharp, exacting, heavy with judgment. He rose slowly when she entered. Specialist Vance. Sir, you disappeared from Dreen without authorization. You commandeered a military aircraft under false credentials, and now an entire sector of Korad province is reporting electromagnetic failure. Care to explain? Havern stepped forward. She prevented a global catastrophe, Colonel. That entire valley was. Mathis raised a hand. You're not cleared for classified containment data, Director. Vance met his gaze evenly. Neither are you. A murmur rippled through the room. Mathis studied her for a long moment. I could have you detained for that remark. You could, she said quietly. But then you'd have to explain why the system you were testing in Korad shares a code lineage with a Spectre project terminated in 2013. Silence. Havern glanced between them, understanding dawning slow and dangerous. Mathis's jaw tightened. You think you're the only one carrying ghosts, Vance. That project built careers, entire divisions. And buried a few teams, she said. He didn't answer. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I shut it down. Whatever was in that valley is gone. Mathis's expression flickered, relief masked by frustration. You expect me to believe you did it alone. I didn't. She slid Keller's tag onto the table. It landed with a soft metallic click. They helped. Mathis stared at it. His shoulders sagged. For a moment, command left his body, replaced by something human. He picked up the tag, turning it over in his hand. You were never supposed to survive that mission. I noticed. He looked up. We classified Spectre as unstable. You were the variable that wouldn't cooperate. That's what happens when you build soldiers out of silence, she said. The colonel exhaled slowly, the weight of a decade pressing into his spine. What do you want, Vance? She paused. The question sounded foreign, almost absurd. What did she want? After a moment she said, "To be done." He studied her again, then gave a faint, humorless smile. "No one ever really is." She turned toward the exit. "Then I'll learn how." Outside, the night air was cool. Havern caught up to her near the trucks. "You're walking away." "I finished the mission." He shook his head. "They'll bury it again, you know that, maybe this time deeper." "Let them." He hesitated. "And you, what happens now?" She looked toward the horizon, a black line between stars and sand. "I disappear, properly this time." He frowned. "You can't just." "I was trained to vanish." She gave a faint smile. "It's the only thing I ever mastered." Havern searched her face for something he couldn't name: fear, regret, maybe the slightest crack in that unshakable calm. He found none, only exhaustion. He nodded slowly. "If you ever need extraction again." She cut him off gently. "I won't." He wanted to argue, but the words caught in his throat. Some people didn't need saving. Some had already done it too many times. She left before dawn. No uniform, no convoy. Just a civilian jacket, a backpack, and the road. For 2 days she moved east through border towns that had forgotten the war. Markets, children, stray dogs, the ordinary hum of life she had spent half a lifetime protecting without ever touching. Everywhere she went, people smiled politely and looked past her, as if the desert had taught them not to notice ghosts in daylight. She liked it that way. At a roadside cafe in Jalab, she stopped for coffee. The waitress, barely 20, set the cup down with a shy grin. "You military?" Vance hesitated, then shook her head. "Not anymore." "Good," the girl said. "You look tired." Vance smiled faintly. "I am." She drank slowly, watching the sun climb over the rooftops. The heat shimmered against the glass, bending the light into waves. For a moment she thought she saw 6 figures walking through it, side by side, gear slung over their shoulders, laughing. Then the image broke apart, only mirage. Still, it made her whisper something under her breath. A word only she and they would understand. Home. Days turned to weeks. The world moved on, as it always does. Kored's crater was sealed, filed under geological anomaly. Havern returned to his office in D.C., his testimony redacted before it was even typed. And Fort Dreen continued its drills, its cadets shouting cadence into the wind, none of them knowing that the ground beneath their boots had once trained a ghost. But sometimes, at night, Mathis would stand alone in his office and look at the single dog tag hanging by his desk lamp. He'd wonder how many secrets were buried beneath that small piece of metal. He never wrote the report that headquarters demanded. Instead, he filed 2 sentences in the classified archive. Subject: Vance, status unknown. Recommendation: leave her be. Far from any base, deep in the southern flats, a small house sat on the edge of a salt plain. Inside, the light was dim, the air quiet. Alara lived there now. She kept no photos, no medals, only a small lockbox under the bed, the tag, a folded patch with faded stitching, and a notebook filled with coordinates she would never visit again. Some nights she couldn't sleep. The silence pressed too close, like the tunnels had followed her here. When that happened, she'd walk outside and sit on the porch, staring at the stars. She'd listen to the wind. Sometimes it was just wind. Sometimes it was a faint pulse, almost inaudible, 6 beats, then stillness. She never looked for the source. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "Rest." And the wind would quiet. Weeks later, a letter arrived. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature, just one line written in careful, printed script. "We found another site." Beneath it, coordinates. Her hands didn't tremble as she folded the paper, slid it into the fire, and watched it burn. The flames turned it to ash in seconds. She sat there long after the embers cooled, staring at the smoke curling toward the night sky. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Not this time." But fate has its own sense of gravity. One morning, weeks later, she woke to the faint buzz of static on her old field radio, a device she'd sworn she'd dismantled. She crossed the room, staring at the dial. The power light was dead, yet the speaker hissed softly. A voice barely audible. "Spectre 1, report." She stood still, hand hovering above the switch. The rational part of her said, "Destroy it." The soldier in her said, "Answer." She closed her eyes, and for the first time she smiled, small, sad, certain. Then she reached out and turned the dial off. The silence that followed was clean, pure. She stepped outside. The horizon was endless, the morning air sharp with promise. For once she didn't look back. For once the ghosts didn't call her name. Some legends end in glory. Others end in quiet places no one ever visits. Hers ended here, not with medals or orders, but with stillness earned the hard way. Because sometimes redemption isn't a return. It's release. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply fades into the light, finally unafraid to rest. The desert remembers. Even when men forget, it keeps the shape of what fell upon it: boot prints, tire tracks, the faint echo of thunder that once tore the sky open. It keeps silence like a secret. And somewhere within that silence, she still walks. Not as a soldier, not as a legend, but as something simpler. 3 months passed before the world noticed what had happened in Kored. Satellite scans picked up the crater, but the report was buried under geological jargon. A localized atmospheric disturbance. That's what they called it. They never mentioned that, for 72 hours afterward, every military satellite over the region went blind. Those who'd worked in signals called it the quiet window. And then they forgot it ever happened. But not everyone forgot. In certain closed offices, in files that carried no classification stamps, there was still one name penciled in red ink. Spectre 1 decommissioned. Do not retrieve. Someone had finally learned that some ghosts deserved to rest. Alara Vance didn't think about that anymore. Her house near the salt flats had become less of a refuge and more of a boundary, a thin line between the woman she was and the memory that followed. The days ran together, morning light through half-closed blinds, coffee black and silent, the steady sound of wind against sand. She grew things now. Small things. Basil mint, an olive sapling she'd rescued from a dying nursery. She said little, listened much. Sometimes a local boy would pass by on his way to the outpost and wave. She'd raise a hand, nothing more. She didn't invite people close, not because she feared them, but because some distances are meant to keep both sides safe. In town, they called her the woman with the quiet eyes. No one knew her past, and no one asked. It was better that way. One afternoon, she sat outside, notebook open, pencil idle. The page was half filled with coordinates, not places she meant to go, but memories she couldn't fully release. The air shimmered with heat, the horizon wavered. Then a shadow passed over her, small, sudden. She looked up, a hawk circled, wings cutting the sunlight. For reasons she couldn't name, the sight steadied her. That was when the truck arrived. A government model, old but maintained, dust trailing behind it like a comet's tail. Her hand moved to the pistol under the table, instinct, not fear. When it stopped, the driver's door opened. Havern stepped out. He hadn't changed much, just older around the eyes. He gave a faint wave. "You're hard to find." She leaned back, unimpressed. That was the point. He smiled. "You look better than I expected." "You expected worse." "I always do." He came closer. the crunch of gravel beneath his boots familiar in a way that pulled her halfway back into the past. "Coffee?" she asked. He blinked. "You're offering me coffee." She shrugged. "Seems safer than letting you talk first." Inside, the house smelled of earth and roasted beans. He took the mug she handed him, looking around. Minimal furniture, no photos, no clutter. Everything intentional. Everything quiet. "You really did it," he said softly. "You disappeared." She sat opposite him, elbows on the table. "You came all this way to confirm that." He hesitated, partly, mostly to tell you something. She waited. He reached into his jacket and slid a small black folder across the table. The cover was blank. Inside, a photograph, satellite image of a barren island, ocean currents swirling around it. "Another site," he said, "off the Lorne coast. Same frequency traces as Korad, not active yet, but—" "No." He stopped. "You haven't even heard." "I don't need to." Havern leaned forward. "Alara, this isn't a mission, it's a warning. Whatever that program became, someone's rebuilding it. Quietly." She stared at the photo, then at him. "You came to ask me to stop them." He didn't answer. She leaned back, eyes on the window. "You think I owe them that?" "I think you owe yourself the choice." The words hung there. For a long time, she said nothing. The only sound was the slow ticking of the kitchen clock, like a heart trying to decide if it should keep beating. Then she whispered, "Every time I fought for something, I lost a part of me. If I go back, there won't be anything left." Havern looked down, fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "Maybe that's how redemption works. You don't get it once. You keep earning it." She gave a small, sad laugh. "You ever think redemption's just a story we tell ourselves so we can keep going?" He smiled faintly, "All the time." They sat in silence. Outside, wind dragged a curtain of dust across the flats. When he finally stood, she didn't stop him. He left the folder on the table. At the door, he paused. "You can burn it, or you can read it. Either way, I'll make sure they never find you again." She met his eyes. "Thank you." He nodded. For what it's worth, Keller would have been proud. Then he left. The door closed. The dust settled. She sat there for a long while, staring at the black folder. Then she opened it. The photograph inside was grainy, an island shaped like a scar. Beneath it, a string of coordinates, nothing else. She ran her finger over the numbers. For the first time in months, she felt something shift in her chest, not duty, not fear. Something quieter. Purpose. And then just as quickly, she closed the folder. "Not yet," she murmured. She placed it in a drawer beneath the counter, covered it with a folded dishcloth, and walked outside. That evening the sky burned gold. She sat on the porch steps, watching the light melt into the horizon. The wind rose and fell, carrying faint echoes of the world beyond her reach, laughter from the town, a radio from a passing truck, the soft hum of power lines. Ordinary sounds, beautiful in their smallness. She breathed them in. For years, she'd lived between two frequencies, human and something else. But now, in the quiet, she could almost believe that whatever haunted her had finally let go. Almost. Then faintly, from somewhere distant, maybe memory, maybe imagination, came a single note. A hum. Low, steady. Not threatening. Not calling. Just there. She smiled. "You're still watching." The hum faded, leaving silence. And for the first time in 12 years, Alara Vance laughed. Softly, like a secret told to the wind. In another world, in rooms filled with humming monitors and men in uniforms, files were opened, reviewed, and closed again. Her name appeared briefly on a screen, then disappeared. Someone made a note, presumed inactive. And the world kept moving. But somewhere in the code of an old dying system, a line still blinked. Spectre 1 signal equals alive. The screen flickered once, then went dark. Back on the salt flats, Alara walked toward the horizon, the evening light soft and endless. She carried nothing but her notebook, pages fluttering in the wind. She stopped at the edge of the plain and looked out at the line where land met sky. "Ghosts don't die," she whispered. "They just learn how to live differently." She dropped the notebook. The wind caught it, scattered the pages into the air, each one spinning, rising, disappearing into the orange light. She didn't watch them go. She turned, walked back toward the small house, the world around her bathed in quiet gold. The door closed gently behind her. The camera would linger there, the porch empty, the air still, the sound of the wind fading into nothing. Then faintly, a voiceover, the last echo of her story. In the end, it wasn't the battles that defined her. It was the silence she carried afterward. Because real strength isn't noise. It's the choice to keep walking, even when the world no longer remembers your name. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts, then disappears, leaving behind nothing but peace.